Okay, I'm Barbara Garrity Blake, and I am talking to Ellen Marie Cloud on March 30th, 2016. And this is part of the Coastal Voices Portlight Project. So Ellen, just for the record, could you just give me a little bit of background information on when you were born and where you grew up?
Do I have to tell you when I was born?
No, you don't. Actually, just tell me when you grew up. I mean, when you grew up. I mean, where you grew up.
I was born and reared on Ocracoke Island.
Okay. That's all I want to know.
And by the way, you're the only one other than Ocracokers that call me Ellie Marie.
Okay.
And Karen Ansbacher does too. And, because when I left Ocracoke, I said my name is Ellen, so everybody called me Ellen.
Oh, okay.
So when I hear Ellie Marie, I know it's an Ocracoker. Or you or Karen.
Okay, and I call you Ella Marie because Karen always refers to you as Ella
yeah.
Marie. Okay.
But one time when we were in Key West, Florida, I was in a store, and as a matter of fact, I was in a Sears store, and I heard somebody say, well, Ellie Marie, and that was the funniest feeling. And I turned around and looked, sure enough, there was an Ocracoker standing there.
Really? In Florida? How about that? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we'll get right to the topic at hand because we have interviewed you before about what it was like to grow up on Ocracoke and all the changes and the storms. So could you tell us about your father and how he came to get involved in running a mailboat?
Well, my father was from Harkers Island, and he came to Ocracoke fishing. He met my mother and married and stayed there. And then he got a job on the mailboat as a mate with Mr. Wilbur Nelson, who was running the mailboat at the time from Ocracoke to Atlantic. So he got a job with him on there, and he worked with him as a mate during the war and everything. And then Wilbur Nelson gave up the mail contract, and Daddy and George O'Neill applied and got it. And they bought the boat from Wilbur Nelson.
And what was your father's name?
Elmo Fulcher.
Elmo Fulcher.
Yes.
And so when you say the war, are you talking about World War II?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so they bought the Alita, the two of them together, and ran the mail, and they ran 1 week on and went off.
I'll put that there because that's going to pick up. That's okay.
They ran a week on, a week off, the two of them, like that. So, and then Daddy shrimped when it's week off, he would get shrimping in it. So they ran the mail until 1952, and they lost the mail contract to Ansley O'Neill. So Daddy bought the Alita from George, his part of it, and he kept that and turned it into a shrimp boat and worked that until he died.
Now, how in the world did they lose the contract after all those years?
Well, somebody bid lower than them for doing it.
Was that something that was possible year after year?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yep.
wow.
Yep.
Did he have hard feelings against Ansley?
No, I don't think so, and I don't think that didn't bother them at all because they knew that, they were paving the road, and they were going to put ferries on, and that was going to be the end of it anyway.
Hmm.
So they knew that was coming. So
right.
Was,
And so it was Ansley who?
O'Neill.
So he was from Ocracoke.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And his boat he ran the mail on was the Dolphin.
Okay.
But it was only for a few years, because when they put the ferry service on, they stopped the mailboat run.
Okay. So did you ever ride on the mailboat?
Yes, many times. Of course, we went as regular passengers, and on it, and also whenever Daddy had to take the boat to the railways, family would always go on it to Beaufort, and that's when we go to the doctors and the dentist and all that. While he had the boat on the railways, but he had to have somebody else to run the mail. Usually, it would be a shrimp boat or something while he had the boat on the railways. And I don't know if you know about this or not, and I didn't know about it until I moved to Atlantic. there was a woman killed on the mailboat. And I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I just, I don't believe it. How would I not know that? And come to find out, it's when one of those other ones was running on a shrimp boat. And I guess this lady was like in the cabin, and she fell on the engine, and it killed her. And she was from Stacy, I think, or somewhere, Stacy or Sea Level. And she stayed at Okeechobee a lot. I don't know why, but she was backwards and forwards a lot. But I did not know that. I didn't know they'd ever had anything like that happen.
How'd you find out?
Somebody asked me about it when I was living in Atlantic. They said, what do you know about so-and-so about her getting killed? And I said, what? I had no idea. So after, of course, they mentioned it, I checked it out. And I think it was Corky Mason that was running the mail that week when that happened.
So that was one of the substitutes while your father
Yes.
had the boat on the railways?
Mm-hmm.
Would those boats just be like a shrimp boat or something?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and not really equipped for passengers,
Yeah. I wonder if there was any kind of long-term impact. Did they quit, letting...
I don't know.
Huh.
That's
This is good.
Like I say, it was just a shock to me because I hadn't heard it.
Yeah, that's terrible. Ellen, where was the railway?
In the one that he put the boat to was always in Atlantic. In Beaufort. Now, later years, he would go to Gloucester.
To Mac Pigot's? Where was the one in Beaufort, though? I don't remember.
It was on Front Street,
Huh.
way down the end, I think, that way.
How about that? Yeah.
And we stayed to the Inland Inn, and we could walk to the doctors and whatever,
It's nice.
Yeah.
So that was a long trek, wasn't it?
Yes.
How many hours would it take to get from Ocracoke to Beaufort?
Oh, my gosh, I don't know. It took all day. Yeah, it took all day.
So you rode on it as a family to do that kind of thing, and then did you also ride on it just with
Yes.
passengers and mail?
Yeah. And at the time, we had a bus that met the mail boat in Atlantic.
Oh.
So you could ride the mail boat and then get on a bus and go to Beaufort or wherever you wanted to go. And, of course, that bus stopped, too, when the mail boat stopped. But that was handy for people at Atlantic and everybody, they ran on that bus. But, yeah, I ran on the mail boat as a passenger, and I was not a very good person. I didn't understand that seasickness, because I had never been seasick. And I would lay on the boat and eat something that I knew would bother somebody, just to see how they would react. It's horrible. And I was a kid, but I just want to see how many people get sick.
Like, what would you eat?
Whatever I find, an orange or anything that would smell,
Yeah. Did you ever see people get sick?
Oh, yeah.
So where did you sit? Where did people
Okay,
sit?
the cabin, the mailboat had, the long cabin on it, and it was a partition from the engine room to the passenger's room. And in the passenger's room, on both sides, there were long seats with cushions on them to sit on. And except for one side, it was all seats, one seat all the way around. The other side, it was halfway, and then it stopped, and then the bathroom was there.
Oh.
Had a little toilet there, you go in. And I seen a many women run for that toilet. And Daddy bringing them buckets to throw up in.
Was the toilet just a wooden seat with I guess there was just a bucket probably.
No, it was like a toilet.
Oh,
It was
that's
a
nice.
commode, yeah.
Wow.
Mhm. I don't think it flushed. It probably just went out. I don't know.
Yeah. Huh. So, how much did it cost to ride as a passenger?
50 cents.
It's not bad.
Yeah, no. It's 50 cents.
And what sort of things would people carry on there?
People usually just carried their suitcase, what have you, but there was a lot of stuff shipped on there, unusual stuff. Well, they would bring, the most exciting thing would be the baby chickens. People that Oakley would order them from the feed store in Moorhead. And he would send them by bus to the mailboat, and then Daddy would bring on the mailboat and bring them. And when the mailboat would come up to the dock, you could hear those baby chickens chirping. And everybody said, "Oh, the baby chicks are here."
Aw, that's so nice.
Yeah, you could hear them chirping when they came to the dock.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody met the mailboat. Everybody. The whole island. And the boys would carry the mail up to the post office for them and everything.
Where precisely did the mailboat tie up?
At the mailboat dock.
And where was that?
That was directly in front of the post office on the creek side.
Oh, but you said that the boys would carry. Oh, they would just simply carry it up the dock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They had a mailboat dock, and that's just what it was for. And that's all. Well, Daddy's tied his shrimp boat up on one side and the mailboat on the other.
So is that where the old post office was? That's now like a decoy gift shop.
No, that was an older one than that. It used to be, I think, a store and a post office, whatever. But it was really old, no paint on it or anything, and it had a square wooden box on the outside you could drop mail in, for being delivered. Now, in later years, before the mail stopped running, they did build the one that's now the decoy thing. But the original old one was behind that.
Okay.
And set facing the water.
Mm-hmm. So almost in the same place, but closer to the water. I gotcha. Okay. So what was your father like?
Well, he was wonderful.
You're biased.
Daddy was a quiet man. He didn't speak very often, but when he did say something, it was usually funny, And he always had a cigar in his mouth. Always had a cigar. Didn't ever smoke it. He'd chew it. He would light it when he put it in his mouth, He would light it. And then he'd just hold it in his mouth all the time. And he'd chew on that one end. It would go out, it didn't bother him. He'd chew it until he'd get it off and he'd spit it out. And he'd do that till he chewed the whole cigar.
Wow.
But he was noted for that cigar in his mouth.
Yeah. I imagine he must have been pretty good with people because he had to work with them every day.
Yes, he was. And I've had people here comment on Daddy and what a good man he was, and that makes you feel good. As a matter of fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I was in the Methodist thrift store there in Straits, and James Paul Lewis was in there. And he came up and was talking to me, and he says, "Ellen," he says, your father was a good man." And I said, "Yes, he was, James. I appreciate that." He said, "He really was." He says, "I dealt with him the whole time he was running the mail," he says. So I got to know him, he says. But one time, there was a group of boats from down this way that was the Ocracoke tied up, and it turned real cold. And it was bad, and it was cold, and they were down there with nothing. And they looked up, and here come Elmo with all he could carry of quilts and blankets down there to those men. He said, "No, he didn't have to do that." I said, "No, he didn't." He said, "Well, that's just the kind of man he was." I said, "Well, I know." Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Did your dad ever tell you stories about his experience running the mailboat?
Mm-mm. No.
So he was kind of quiet.
He was just quiet, yep.
Huh. Because that made me think, I wonder if he'd ever gotten caught out there in a storm or a bad time with the public.
No. I'll tell you this. He'd had different people run as mates with him, on there. And this one time he was having you probably didn't know him, George Jackson. They called him Guthrie. George Guthrie Jackson was running his mate. Well, he came down that morning to leave, and it was foggy. It was just so foggy you couldn't see anything. And he loved to tell the story. Of course, Guthrie was a storyteller anyway. But he said, he says, you stand on the dock and you didn't know where to step because you couldn't see the boat. That's how thick the fog was. And he said, "Elmo, you're not going to run today, are you?" And he says, "Yes, I am." He says, "You can't run in this fog." He says, "Get on the boat. We're going to Atlantic." So he did, and he said it's the longest trip that's ever been. But Elmo navigated that boat with his pocket watch, and he knew just the distance from one buoy to the next one, and the direction. So he'd run at a certain time to that buoy, and then he would turn the other direction and run a certain time where he'd know he'd be to the next one. Well, he said he heard him, the engine slow right down, like he backed up, and he says, Elmo, what's going on? He says, what do you mean, Guthrie? He says, why are you slowing down? He says, well, we're to the dock to Atlantic.
Oh my gosh.
And his Guthrie says, I stuck my head out of the window. He says, I could hear people talking on the dock. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. He says, we were to Atlantic.
That's funny. That was some thick fog.
So, yep.
Wow.
They always said, they always said Daddy could navigate with the stars and the pocket watch. That's all he needed.
That's nice.
And another time, there was a guy from Atlantic was out in the ocean in one of those trawlers, and he couldn't get in. The weather was so bad, and he just couldn't see anything, and he couldn't get through the inlet, and the Coast Guard couldn't get out to him. It was so bad. So Daddy leaves home. He was listening at him on the shortwave radio in the house. So he left home and went down to the boat, and we sat there and listened to him. And he called him. He says, Terry, what's your location? And he told him his readings. He says, all right. He said, now you go such and such a direction. And he brought him through that inlet and to the dock to Ocracoke. Wow. By just sitting there on that CB radio,
Wow.
Now, and of course, we all went down to meet him when he came to the dock, Now, he was a happy man.
I bet. Well, when you were on the boat, what did people do? What did the passengers do to pass the time?
Read a magazine or sit there and talk or gossip.
So usually you knew people on there?
Yeah. It was mostly just local people that used it, except for in the summer there'd be some tourists on there.
Did anybody fish off the boat or anything?
No.
Could you ride on top if you wanted?
You could ride on top. There were benches or seats and a canvas awning, heat sun off of it. And on the back, the stern of the boat was round. And on the back there was a round seat. And it was framed up with a pipe, but it had cushions on it. You could sit right on the stern of the boat. And that's where everybody liked to get when it was pretty,
Yeah, is that where you wanted to ride?
Yep. And then from the deck, there were steps that went down into the quarters, into the cabin. Mm-hmm. And then beside that, there were little steps that went up to get on top. The flagpole was right there by that. He had a flagpole.
Just last night, for some reason, Brian was on the internet and he pulled up a picture of the Alita on the internet. And he still forgot to tell me that you called. But anyway, what a beautiful boat that was with that round stern.
Yeah.
Because he said he worked on it at Max.
Yes. And it's Ambrose Fulcher at Atlantic built it.
Okay.
And that was his style of boat. And I can recognize anytime I see a boat that Ambrose built, I know he built it.
Oh, okay.
His style was so different from everybody else's.
Yeah. Did he build it for your father, or did your father buy it from somebody?
Daddy bought it.
Who did he buy it from? Do you remember?
Wilbur Nelson.
Okay.
He was running the mail with him at the time.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
You started off telling me that. Yeah.
Ambrose Fulcher built it for, I can't think who he built it for now. It's a Mason, I think. But anyway, he named it Alita after his sister.
Oh.
So they kept that name.
That was Ambrose's sister, Alita?
Not Ambrose.
The Wilbur? Yeah.
Howard Nelson.
Okay.
Was the one they built it for.
Yeah.
And it was a booze runner at one time.
Really?
Yes.
How did that happen?
I don't know. But it was captured deceased, yeah.
So that was before your father had the
Oh,
boat?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what was it like for him to run the mail during World War II?
He met a lot of people because a lot of the military would write it backwards and forwards. And sometimes their family would come and everything. So it was different because he met people from all over, where it was, instead of just the local people going backwards and forwards. And brought a lot of mail for them too.
So he didn't have to undergo any kind of special restrictions, and they didn't try to confiscate his boat and use it for the effort. That's good. So what was the ultimate fate of the Alita?
It's a sad story. My father died. He didn't leave the boat to anybody. You know, it was just in the estate. So we all got together and we talked about it. And we didn't want the boat to go anywhere. We wanted to stay in the family. My brother Laurie would have loved to have it, but he just said he couldn't. No way he could keep it up. You know, he just couldn't financially, and didn't want it to run down, you know. And so Murray said that he would take it. And so Murray took it, and he did keep it up, and then Keith, his son, ran it as a street boat for a while.
Who was your nephew?
Keith Fulcher,
Was
yes.
your nephew, yeah.
So then when Keith gave it up, he got a bigger boat, you know, so he got that one. Murray took the boat to the dock and beat the sides off of her, beat the cabin off of her, was going to make a run boat, you know, for his boats that were fishing out there. And for some reason he took it to South River to have something done on it, and then they never did it, or he never paid them to do it, or never told them to do it, or something. And it sat down there so long that the guy called Murray, and he said, you know, we got to do something with this boat. You know, it's in the way, if you want it fixed or whatever. And Murray told him to take it up the river and sink it.
Aw. Aw.
And that's what happened to it.
Was it in pretty, she was in bad shape at that point, probably.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's too bad.
It was. Because when Murray first got it, I went so far as to get the applications from the Maritime History to have it restored as a mailboat to have to the dock at Oakley for people to see, you know, and everything. And he just thought that was the silliest thing he ever heard of. He wouldn't even, but wouldn't that been wonderful?
That would have been wonderful. That would have been just wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you remember any other mailboats that were working at the time?
Just the Dolphin.
Mm-hmm. And how about, do you remember the boat called the Alfonso?
Mm.
I was told that that was a Menhaden boat, and then it was turned into a freight boat, and then it was a museum on the Beaufort waterfront. Does that ring a bell?
No,
Okay.
but I would have liked to have known that.
Yeah. I don't know if I have that written down here, but I just thought that was a real interesting little story. Do you remember any of the freight boats that would come and go from Ocracoke?
Let's see if I can remember the names of them. The Lindsay Warren, the Dryden. So two I can think of. Actually, the Dryden was the one that Red-Headed Ike, they used to call him, ran, and my grandfather ran on over them, George Jackson. And I got pictures of him on that boat. And then the other one was Van Henry O'Neill ran that one, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so, where did they go?
To Washington, North Carolina.
Okay.
And they would bring cars or whatever. They would
Really?
just load them on there, you know, and bring the car over.
This was before your time, but steamboats come to Ocracoke too?
I don't know. Yeah, there were. Yeah, I've got some pictures of them. Steamboat Ocracoke, as a matter of fact, the name of it.
Okay.
And it ran from, I think, Washington to Ocracoke and then on up to Virginia
Uh-huh.
or somewhere. And it was a strange thing. I had heard about the steamboats, but I had never seen one. And when I moved to Atlantic, the girl that bought the house next door to me came over and said she had some things that were from Ocracoke, if I would like to have them. And I said, you got to be kidding. She said, no. They were in the safe there in that house when she bought it. Well, it's Clarence Scarver used to run on the ferries. And he married a woman from Atlanta, his second wife, and that's where they lived, in that little house. Well, he died and he left that stuff there, so she gave it to me. And there was pictures of him in his uniform and all this, and there was a copy of the original will from his mother, but there were pictures of these steamboats. And I was just so excited because, I had heard about them, but I'd never seen them.
Do you still have them?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see them if they're handy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
You want me to get them now? Or
Well,
when
when we finish up. I just wanted to ask you about, for that time in history, how important were these mail boats and freight boats and fish by boats? What, looking at the big picture.
Well, they were the livelihood of the island. I mean, they really were. That was the only way to get mail, to get freight, to get food, anything.
Did you ever feel isolated on Ocracoke?
No, it was heaven. It was heaven. And, I've had people to say, like, when I moved back to Ocracoke for a while now, and people would say, well, didn't you miss Ocracoke? I says, I still miss Ocracoke. And they look at me like, I says, this is not Ocracoke. It's not Ocracoke. I miss Ocracoke.
I got you. You would say you still miss it while you were right there on the island.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, because sometimes, you read accounts of Ocracoke and Hatteras and all the villages, and there's the impression that people were very isolated. And yet, when you look at this transportation system, it didn't seem like people were all that isolated, really.
And we'd have people ask us, when we were teenagers, well, what do you do here, And I said, well, what do you do where you are? You can't do the things that we do. I mean, it was like there were no boundaries because your parents didn't have to worry about you leaving. You couldn't go anywhere. And if you did anything wrong, if the neighbor or whoever was around and saw you, she'd spank you. And then tell your mother and you get another one. So, that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
And nowadays you couldn't do that.
No.
Like they did then.
Yeah.
And you knew you were going to get it, so you didn't do anything wrong. But we just, it was nothing to be down at the store or whatever, and kids would be swimming and they'd grab you and throw you off the end of the dock. You just put on clean clothes and whatever, and overboard you'd go. And we'd go down at night and swim across the creek and back, at night and watch the phosphorus in the water. It was beautiful. Or we'd go on the beach and go swimming. We'd go steal somebody's watermelons and go on the beach and, have a watermelon party. Or in the wintertime, we'd steal somebody's chickens. And they knew it. And they put up with it. Wally Spencer was one. One time we wanted something to do. Well, let's go get us a chicken. We'll stew it and play some games and whatever. So we went to Wallace's. And we'd get there and that chicken, of course, they'd start hollering, and we'd run. And at that time, there was that tall grass and sea oats and everything out behind his house. All the lights in the house would come on, he'd come out there hollering and cussing, and we'd lay there and laugh our head up.
With the chicken?
With the chicken, holding that chicken and him hollering.
So you all knew how to kill and dress a chicken?
Yeah, we'd go to the house and the boys would kill it and dress it, and we'd stew it. And
That sounds like a grand time, really.
It was. It was.
So what would happen if somebody was having a medical emergency?
Helicopters.
Okay.
Always at Coast Guard would call a helicopter.
What about if somebody was going into labor? Would they get on the mailboat? Or they felt like they were close to labor? Would they get on the mailboat?
Usually they didn't, but I did. I got on the ferry. I'm sorry. I went in labor at Okeechobee and I got on the ferry, and that's when it's running 4 hours to Atlantic. And I went on that 4-hour trip because the road had washed out at going to Hatteras, and we couldn't go that way. I came across that 4-hour train and drove all the way around to Elizabeth City to my doctor. Crazy.
In labor?
Now, when I was flown out of there with a helicopter.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And there was some born, that they didn't know where to put them because they'd be in the helicopter and be between the two places,
Yeah, yeah.
And we had babies born out in the inlet in Hatteras. Get ashore, the Coast Guard boat would get a grain, and that baby would be born out there in that inlet.
That would be a special thing to know you were born in an inlet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think anybody was born on a mailboat?
Not that I know of.
Yeah. So when you said you took the ferry to Atlantic, was that the private ferry?
That was the first ferry at the sea level that the Taylor brothers built.
So that was private. That wasn't a state run. That was
At first it was private, I think, and then the state took it over.
Oh, what was that like?
It was not practical because it was top heavy. They had cabins up top and a place to cook and all that, and it was just top heavy. It was just fine when the weather was pretty, but when it was rough, it would roll, and I'd seen fish on the deck of it, being so rough.
My gosh. Wow, so was
Now, she was rebuilt, and I think might be still running down at Minnesota.
Really?
I think.
What was the name of the ferry?
It was the sea level.
The Sea Level. Wow. Was it a wooden ferry or a metal ferry or?
No, it was metal. Mm-hmm.
Huh. So, and then at some point, obviously, the ferry system switched over to Cedar Island.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which made it much better because you only had the 2-hour ride then, but cut it in half.
Yeah. That cut it in half? Mm-hmm. Just from Cedar Island to Atlantic was a 2-hour difference? How could that be?
I don't know, but it was.
Wow. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
Huh. So, let's see. I want to ask you, but before we move on to that, did your father ever let you steer?
Oh, yeah.
Did you like that?
All the time, yeah.
Did he let other people steer?
Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, when I was at Portsmouth one time, I met this black family that came over. They were relatives of Henry Piggs, actually, but they had never been to Portsmouth. And Rudy Austin called me and told me I was at Portsmouth, so they're staying a month. And he called me and told me he was bringing them over, and would I show them around? I said yes. So I met them and became very good friends with the family. And this one, Mr. Carter, he was my best friend. But anyway, I had that book I had written about Portsmouth over there, and I showed it to them, and they were so excited because I had a chapter about their family. Well, when he left Portsmouth, he went to the museum in Okeechobee, and he bought all their books, and he sent them to family all over the world. And so I got this nicest letter from this lady, and she told me that she went to Portsmouth just one time. She says, and she rode with my father, and he let her steer the mailboat. And she thought that was the greatest thing.
That's nice.
So yeah, he did let other people steer.
That is really nice. So you knew Henry Piggott?
Mm-hmm.
What was he like?
Quiet. He was a very quiet person. Mm-hmm. Family. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Daddy used to let us go, because a lot of time I just rode the boat backwards and forwards just to have something to do in the summertime. But as a matter of fact, we got a picture somebody took of it. We were waiting for Henry to come. We were out there on the boat, and Murray and I, Daddy had let us go out of the front doors, and we were out on the bow of the boat waiting for Henry, because we'd always talk to him and everything. And there's a picture of us hanging on the front of that boat waiting for Henry to come up to the dock,
Aw.
And I got, as a child, I knew Henry,
So he would always meet the mailboat.
Mm-hmm.
Did he? I thought he shoved a skiff out to meet
He
it.
did.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would love to see that picture too. I don't know if you got that, but that sounds like it's really interesting.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. Do you ever remember hearing about a boat called the Bessie Virginia?
Mm-hmm. The freight boat.
Mm-hmm. Yep. From
Yeah.
Ocracoke to Washington, the last one.
Yeah, I think that's the one that Van Henry ran.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see it?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever ride on it?
No, never did.
So you never went to Little Washington?
Never did ever go that way for anything. Now, a lot of people did, but I didn't. There's always went whatever way Daddy was going.
Did he ever go north?
Mm-mm. No.
Yeah. He had his route.
Yep.
He stuck to it.
Yes, he did.
Huh. Okay. So I guess to end up, do you remember anything in particular, any unusual thing that was transported on the boat, or any unusual people, or any vivid memory of one of your trips?
I remember that one time Daddy took the boat at night and came to Atlantic to bring somebody that was in a lot of pain, suffering, trying to pass kidney stone. And he couldn't get off the island. They couldn't get anybody to him any kind of way, so Daddy takes the boat and takes him to Atlantic. On that boat, somebody had somebody to meet him there to take him to the doctor. And then I remember when my grandfather died, he was in sea level. And he passed away. Well, Daddy came down in the mailboat to get him, the casket and him, and brought him back. And I watched, right out on the beach with my boyfriend, we watched to see if we could see him coming because the weather was bad. Because Mom was worried to death about him coming by himself on there, with Granddad. And we could see the boat, so I went down there and met him. And he had to do all this besides and still make the mail right. He would have to do it at night where he could still make his mail right during the day. But he did things like that, yeah.
Yeah. Did he transport other people that had died in coffins?
Yep.
Was there anything special he did to mark that there was a dead person on the boat?
No, not that I remember.
Huh. But did he let passengers on?
Mm-hmm.
They would just crowd around the coffin?
Well, no.
Okay.
I would think, now I don't know, but I think he'd probably put the coffin in the engine room with the mail where he was. I would think that, I don't know.
Okay, so he had a special place for the mail and the
Yeah,
cargo.
uh-huh,
Okay, yeah, wow. Well, he sounds like he was a real special man to make night trips to help people and do what needed to be done. Wow. Okay, Ellen, well, anything else you want to add about the Alita before we stop?
Not that I can think of.
All right, well, I really appreciate your time here.
Okay.
Let's go look at some pictures.
Okay.